Thank you all for being here this morning. Excited to see everybody. So we'll just jump right into our discussion this morning. And Jeff, if it's okay, I'll start with you. Just sort of high level, what are you seeing today in regards to the overall health of the market?
It's been a very tumultuous, probably the last 12 months, particularly in spine, a lot of divestiture in spine, consolidation across these industries. I think from the audience here, there seems to be a fair amount of sort of disruption and questions of, as it pertains to being able to fill capacities as a consequence of all that stuff. I think from the OEM perspective, that's a great position to be in because especially if you're in a growth company like we are, we're looking for great partners to kind of get through this sort of low part of the industry. I think the flip side of that is it'll all swing back because it always does.
Nate, what are you seeing from your perspective in terms of the overall health?
Yeah, it's a good question. From the OEM side, I'd agree with Jeff. It seems like the overall health of the market is still pretty strong. On the contract manufacturing side, it's been, I think I picked the wrong time to join this industry about 4.5 years ago with COVID, supply chain challenges, hiring challenges, inflation, and now ramping up to meet demand and then ramping down because of like destocking that's occurred. But overall, I think the health of the market is still solid. I think it's a great market to be in. It's just been, to use Jeff's word, it's been pretty tumultuous.
How about you, Dave?
Well, I'm going to give a perspective from both as a significant contract manufacturer and also was involved with two publicly traded market companies in ATEC and Orthopedics, as well as our foot and ankle company, Vilex. So in the last several years, the equity markets have been really tough on growth companies. When we took Orthopedic public in 2017, the market recognized us with about a 6 to 7 to 1 valuation in terms of revenue to equity value. That's changed now. It's about 2, and same for ATEC Spine. So as I learned going through this whole process is that the valuation you get really drives a lot of things and your ability to do things as an OEM, and that really impacts your ability to grow, and that trickles down to the contract manufacturer ability. How much work do you need to do that? So that's been really punishing the last couple of years. So I think from the equity market side, it's a very challenging time for some of these growth OEMs. In terms of the market, in the last couple of years, we saw a bump. I refer to the COVID period as the plague. So during the plague, it was very interesting. Medical procedures actually dropped off, except the COVID stuff increased, but other routine procedures and orthopedic procedures dropped off. And then that surged after the plague ended, and then it's finally stabled out. It's probably 5% growth is probably what we should expect, reasonable growth. So I think that's pretty good. However, there's some complexities going on in the world, as we all know. I didn't realize it until about a year ago. I realized that 30 to 35% across the board in the United States, our population is dependent on Medicaid or CHIPS for their health care. And of course now with the budget cuts, that is going to affect it. In some urban areas, it's 50%. So 50% of your market, addressable market, has dependent on government subsidized, heavily government subsidized health care. There's going to be I think there'll be a slowdown in procedures. It's quite staggering actually, when you think of health care and how it fits in the whole economy. We have a $30 trillion gross domestic product. The largest single aspect in that segment in this GDP is healthcare. We spend about 3.2% on defense, about 6% on education, and 17% on healthcare. The EU spends about 10% on healthcare. So when you start looking at all this stuff, out of this, when you look at that big chunk of the GDP, there's going to be a big hit to healthcare, more so than you're going to read about probably. And just to shock you even more, and then I'll shut up, but I was doodling with some numbers yesterday during a briefing that I got from an economist that we work with at Rockefeller Securities, and talking about debt and all that stuff. So the national debt right now is $36 trillion. That's a 36 with 12 zeros following it. And when you do so then I just said, well, what is our interest payments per day on the debt? I said, well, just assume 5% interest. So per day, the interest payments of the U.S. debt are $4.9 billion per day. So that's going to, all this stuff is going to impact healthcare as the biggest chunk of the economy. So I think we're going to see some trickle down about that. And then for contract medical manufacturing, I think it's really under stress. Talk about trained people. you hear this cry to bring manufacturing back to the United States. We can't find enough people that are trained and willing to work, and despite the great pay and benefits that we offer. It's a real challenge. I would tell you that it's easier to find a Harvard MBA or lawyer than it is to find someone who can run a 5-axis or program a 5-axis CNC machine with some degree of skill. And you guys have experienced that, but it's really a challenge. And I think we're under tremendous pressure from that regard. You know, people, and going back to the plague, it's been about a 25%, maybe even higher cost per hour, you know, for labor and benefits from 2020 to now, right? It's really tough. And then the other thing, and then I'll really be quiet, but you look at from the OEM side, I always wonder, as I sit on these boards, these two publicly traded companies, they pay more in commissions than they do for cost of goods. That seems kind of odd, right? You know, people who make the stuff get a lot less than the people who sell it. You know, of course, if you're a sales guy, you think, you know, the opposite. But from a contract manufacturing perspective, it seems a little bit strange to do that. Anyways.
Thank you. So obviously a lot of pressure in the industry right now. Maybe one of the release valves in the next 5 to 10 years could be some of these emerging technologies. So Nate, in terms of orthopedic products and orthopedic manufacturing, what technologies are you looking at to really play a role in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, we've been talking about additive manufacturing at OMTEC for years. And about 3 years ago, we made a big investment in additive. We're probably $45 million into that investment. And we think that additive is at the spot now where it's got an ability to not only just make new geometries, new, you know, structures, but it also has the ability to radically transform your costs. And so we've looked at it with, you know, Dave said, you know, 25% labor increases. I think ours is closer to like 35%. So we're looking for ways to reduce our costs. And so that, hence, $40 million of investment is a major investment for us. And so we feel like we're at the stage now where we can dramatically reduce costs and create better products.
Dave, what do you think about some emerging technologies that could help here?
Well, I think that the first thing that strikes me is continuing evolving information technology. So you got, you know, AI, you got this bow wave of quantum stuff that's coming in, and then you got robotics. And we're doing some great work at Structure Medical with the robotic program where we have an operator that's now able to, with a robotic assistant, basically able to run 5 machines pretty efficiently. So it's really quite remarkable. But that's a big investment. You know, anyone can buy the robot, integrating that robotic into being able to go, you know, pick several different machines from several different machines in a circle and work. That required you know, we had to develop our own software and modify the machinery and everything. But so robotics is a big thing. The challenge with robotics, I found out, there's a thing called the Moravec paradox with robotics. So what is that? So for robotics, what humans find hard, robots find easy, and what humans find easy, robots find hard. For example, deburring screws that come off a lathe. A robot would find that very, very difficult to do. A human find it somewhat monotonous to do, but easy to do. So, you know, it's this kind of interesting thing. To get the robots to do a lot of things that humans do easily is very, very expensive, and to get some of the things that humans find hard is not so expensive. So it's a very interesting thing with robotics. I find it fascinating. As we get into this information world, I always wonder at what point, you know, programming is always a challenge for manufacturing. At what point are we going to get to where we just take a print that comes in from the OEM, put it into a scanner, and in seconds a very efficient program is emerged. That's, you know, I think that's going to be happening somewhere. Someone's probably already starting that, but where's it going to be, and what's the cost of that? I would expect at some point it'll become very, very inexpensive to do that. I'm worried about tariffs and machines too, because if capability on machines increases, everyone's going to get that. Again, this meeting I had yesterday with this economist, prior to this January this year, tariffs in the United States were 2.5%. This guy thinks that tariffs will end up at 15%. So you think of all this imported machinery that we all use and the cost of that, you know, now going up 12.5%, or basically tariffs increasing 6 times. It's going to impact that as well too. So something to think about.
And then Jeff, at iRidge Medical, what technologies are you looking at?
I'd combine the two answers. We've got to have the winner of this game is in the orthopedic OEM space is how do I go into an operating room without walking in with $100,000 worth of plates and screws, and at the end of the case they've used one or two. So that probably is a convergence of AI and 3D printing and additive manufacturing such that you can really narrow the band of things that must walk into that room, and you got to be able to do that quickly. You can't wait. I think today the patient-specific stuff today takes days or weeks to get the implant and get it made. So I think between the emerging technologies of software and AI and the acceleration of those technologies, that has to be, it's almost kind of like a Star Trek thing. It's right, put it in a pattern replicator and there you have the implant. That's kind of has to be where it goes because the amount of, especially in a smaller company that's trying to grow in the orthopedic space, the amount of capital you have to deploy to be able to get and win business and stay in the OR is quite staggering. And I think the key has to be somewhere in solving for that problem.
And Jeff, I know spine is largely an inpatient industry, but the emergence of ASCs, does that complicated the picture in terms of managing your inventory across multiple sites?
I don't know if I would describe it as they certainly have their very specific requirements. I don't know that I would call it more complicated. I think it's definitely more. I think ASCs actually are quite specific, quite predictable in what they want. I think the biggest thing about ASCs is a bit of price pressure. That's probably the more relevant dynamic you see, and I think those will continue to grow simply because you basically do a hip and a knee in an ASC now, and that will continue to go up the complexity chain to other specialties in orthopedics.
Nate, you alluded to the huge investment you made to get into additive. How do you balance the pursuit of these new technologies to stay relevant in the industry, stay ahead of the industry, with being price conscious, being cost conscious?
Well, when we made that investment, I looked at it as an offensive strategy and a defensive strategy. So a good portion of our business is in forming operations, so casting and forging. And so we think over time, I don't think casting and forging is ever going to go away, but I think a significant amount of MPI is going to be coming through the additive. So how do we protect our base of business, and how do we also, give new opportunities for new technologies at a different cost point that is very cost effective versus traditional forming operations. So that was really our idea around the investment. But yeah, it was a big one. It was a difficult one to make, but also at the same time we didn't want to be blockbuster in the age of Netflix.
Sure. And then Jeff, Dave, anything to add on the cost effectiveness piece?
Well, I think you have to keep investing to stay current. I mean, there's no opportunity, especially when you have the challenge. Anything you can do, and I don't want to seem harsh, but to reduce the labor content, you have to do it. It's not just, you just can't find the people that you need to do this kind of work here in the United States right now, which is very sad, I think. And but the investment, you have to make those kind of investments to stay current, because there's pricing pressure you receive, and if you can't, if you're starting to continue to do older stuff that tends to be more expensive, you have no choice.
So Jeff, what can OEMs do to be more efficient and or more effective in their ordering, both short-term and long-term?
Most of the people in this room have worked with me on ordering on the OEM side
Should
for
I
the
ask
last
that?
4 years. So here's what I see. HighRidge and the prior company, Paragon, we leverage contract manufacturers almost entirely. And a lot of the orthopedic companies, if it's not a big chunk, it's half. And I'm going to offend a few people in the room, but the way that the OEMs are currently, what that's trained inside the OEM is we basically we behave like purchasing people, and we just issue POs and chase POs. We have forgotten what it actually means to make a screw or plate. So when a person will go and say, hey, I need 10 of these tomorrow, not understanding that 10 requires a 8 to 12 to 18 hour setup on a machine. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, they'll call you the next day and they'll say, take that one down and put this other one on because we need that one now because that one's currently on back order. So I would say that the OEMs should send their purchasing people out to the manufacturers and work in the planning shop at the manufacturer so that they learn what it actually takes to make a plate, a screw, a rod, and understand the planning horizon and the manufacturing lead time within the four walls. When you had the factory downstairs and you had a challenge with scheduling, you kind of walk downstairs and the master scheduler would hit you across the head, say, we can't do that, you can't change up the schedule like that. We've lost that on the OEM side because of the great people in this room, because they do such a great job of manufacturing. We've lost the skill set on the supply chain side of what it actually means, and we've become more of chasing purchase orders.
Dave, how do you think OEMs and CMs can be?
Well, just everything that Jeff said is correct. I'd say also work with a contract manufacturer as soon as possible in the design to make sure that what you're designing is not is manufacturable at a reasonable cost and doesn't have unreasonable dimensions or specifications. I remember years ago I was working in a company that made a lot of surgical drills, and there were one company required there was certain specification for a drill that was like a couple 10,000ths. Yet this drill was going to be used in surgery by human hand, a bloody gloved human hand, and yet they thought 10,000th of an inch or whatever was really important to that. I thought that was very unrealistic. I would also say that I'm really shocked as I spent time with the OEMs how poor the inventory management is across the industry. It's quite staggering, actually, when you think about it. Last year, we got whipsawed at one of our companies because an OEM found millions and millions of dollars worth of usable inventory out in the field. And all of a sudden they said, hey, we really don't have to buy this much. It was a staggering amount. Now, the good news of this is they really, the leadership of the company responded properly, and they did a full court press. And now they have a system in that company, which I think is probably an industry leader. They could probably have a separate company just doing inventory management for OEMs. But I would tell you the inventory system is really poor, very weak throughout the industry, and as a result, that affects OEMs, but fluctuating orders and all that kind of crazy stuff. And then the other thing I would do is I would just ask at the OEM level, are your buyers incentivized that in a manner that really is in the best financial interest of the company? We had an example years ago in one of our companies where we were making a really complex instrument for a company, and for the past 10 years or something, we made basically the same amount of these every year, but they ordered them, instead of ordering that group for the beginning of the year, they would order them in 3s and 4s, just odd numbers, and they wouldn't never commit to take them at the end of the year, so we were at risk for getting stuck with them. So we had to charge them basically double or maybe 3 times what it would cost if they bought them of the thing. But the buyer just said, I can't, my incentive, my compensation is somewhat based on me having less of this stuff on hand. And it was just, it seemed out of sync with the overall financial objectives of the broader company. So I just do a scrub on that. And the other thing that's frustrating to me is Wall Street games at the end of the quarter. Don't send us this stuff. Send us this stuff. Crazy directives from leadership. We can't buy any more inventory for the just really dumb stuff here. And it affects the OEM, affects the contract manufacturer, and don't think it doesn't hurt, when you just say, hey, we're not going to order this stuff or whatever, and all of a sudden there's a surge or something that's based on a crisis. Because as Jeff said, it's hard to respond to a crisis. Stuff doesn't happen, come off the machinery that fast. You guys all know that, but the OEMs in the room need to listen to that, because I've seen it from both sides.
Nate, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I'd say a combination of these two. The more visibility, the better. I mean, I think that's obvious, but the challenge we have, and Dave alluded to this earlier, is that we've shed a lot of our workforce over the last 18 months as this whole industry's kind of gone through. We have too much inventory, and we've been trying to draw that down. Well, these people don't grow on trees, and so if you come back and you say, hey, my forecast doubled in Q3, I
can't do it.
I can't do it. Like it's so the more visibility we can get into that, the better. We can react and we can plan, and we've got overtime capacity and that kind of stuff, but we don't have the ability to double your volume next quarter. And I don't think anybody in this room has that capacity, whether it's internal or external manufacturing. So the more visibility we can get, the better. And then I'd also pile on Dave's comment, this we're not taking any shipments in December to hit an inventory number. That's pretty painful.
Yeah.
And then, Nate, how have you seen this relationship and communication and collaboration between OEMs and CMs evolve since COVID?
It's been kind of all over the map. So there's also been a lot of transition at the OEMs that I've noticed over the last four or 5 years. So there's been a lot of transition, but it's been, right after COVID, it was give me everything that you have as fast as you can. And, we went from 12-week lead times to I think we were at like 45-week lead times on some things. And so everybody just bought. And I think that's kind of led to where we are now, where everybody's like, well, you're back down to 10-week lead times. I don't need 45 weeks of inventory anymore. And so haven't seen, other than a pretty significant amount of turnover in the space, I haven't seen any real differences. But what I'm concerned about is, I think what I said a second ago, is that I think we're reaching the spot where it's going to be, oh my God, I need inventory and I need it tomorrow. And I feel like this is going to be like 2021 and 2022 all over again.
And Jeff, specific to the communication piece between CMs and OEMs, how have you seen that evolve in the last, call it 5 years?
Yeah, I don't know that Nate has got it exactly right. It's quite a bit of a panicked sort of a thing. I think where I've seen it, the dynamic also on the CM side is there's a lot of M&A going on, and so you have companies that are bolting on different types of orthopedic specialties and saying, hey, we can do all these capabilities for you. And I think the ones that I've worked with that have been the most successful are where the internal organizational structure is the clearest, versus sometimes it's hard to know who makes the decisions inside the four walls of those sort of conglomerated companies. And so the ones that I have the best example are the ones that I can pick up the phone as the OEM ops guy, and I can reach into the organization and discuss with whomever I need to, not necessarily to get my stuff put at the front of the line, but at least I know where decisions are made and how we can work together. And I would say make longer term strategic agreements that get you out of the, another sort of pejorative is the tendency of people who are incentivized on changing the price is the cherry picking of the top running SKU, and we're going to move it over there. And so, I would prefer, I think it's more beneficial to lock in business with somebody who can be a key partner for you, and don't go through this annual gymnastics of trying to force a price discussion every single year. It gets to to what you were talking about, right? It's a very short term. The cherry picking is a very short term kind of a perspective. I'd rather lock it in, let it run. Let's be great together, and then I can go and spend my time doing other value added things versus, shaking you down every 2 quarters for price.
Right. Dave, anything to add?
Well, I think I agree with everything that's been said. I'm not sure I can really plus this up anymore. It's just getting a good relationship with the suppliers, mutually beneficial long-term relationships. Why can't we have those instead of these short-term races at the bottom or to save a couple pennies? Like I said, it's interesting that, cost of goods may be 18% of a OEM, but, commissions are 30. It's like, come on.
It's not a cost problem.
Yeah, it's not.
All right, Dave, we'll stay with you. So based on current events, how do you see global manufacturing and supply chains changing in the short and long term?
So
That's a big one.
the supply chain is, I think, is a very fragile thing. We talked about tariffs and machinery. Most of the high-end machines are made offshore. It's very sad in that case. CNC machinery was developed at MIT in the early 1960s to support Defense Department programs. And then a lot of it stayed in the United States, and then it moved offshore. But those machines are going to get increasingly expensive. So I think that's going to be a challenge. I talked about people, getting people. It's really sad that in the United States, we have, in one of our companies, which is located in Florida, we have a significant group of first generation legal immigrants that have worked there. And I think that they received a better technical education in their home country than we've been providing to our people here. What's that all about? We can do better than that. Really, we got good jobs, great place to work. So I think it's, that's going to affect it's just an interesting dynamic that I think we need to deal with and get better at. Well, why can't we have more manufacturing in the United States, with better trained people, taking care of people, and getting the education base to do that? So,
Jeff, how about you?
It's a hard question, right? Because there's so much noise in the near term, and depending on you don't have to be on one side or the other. I'm optimistic about the big beautiful bill with 100% depreciation and some of the other incentives that could possibly come out of that. And I think there is from the tariff perspective, again, I think it's short term. It'll come and go. We may end up somewhere bigger than we are now, but I think for the people in the room here, I think that means we'll have more. I think people will be more interested in doing more manufacturing here in the United States. The challenges that he articulated with training and the availability of the resources to program a CNC, I think, are true and real. I don't know the answer to that. There are some great examples in this room where the contract manufacturer and the local community college have partnered, and they supplement what the education system doesn't do. In places like Michigan and Indiana, I think that's part of the solution, but I don't know that's we'll see that in the rearview mirror anytime soon.
How about you, Nate?
I think in a 5-year span, we've had our global supply chains upended twice. And so I think if you are not planning on having a significant amount of your manufacturing in the U.S., it doesn't have to be all, but a significant part of your manufacturing in the U.S., I think you're making a big mistake, because once this tariff ratchet has been used, there's no saying that so maybe it comes down and it's not 15%, maybe it's 5%. Well, who's to say the next administration doesn't decide it's going to be 40%? And we go through this game for the next 20 years. So I think we got to solve the people problem, and I think there's ways around that. But I think if you don't have if you're not at least dual sourced in the United States for some of your key products, I think you're making a big mistake.
Great.
So Nate, you mentioned that 2 massive disruptions in the span of 5 years. Do you see global supply chains generally as more resilient now than they were in 2019? And if so, how?
I don't. I think I don't think anything changed. I think everybody was like, oh crap, the plague. Nothing works, 45-week lead times. And then it all resolved, and everybody's like, whew, glad we made it past that. And then didn't actually change anything. Started moving more stuff to China, or more, hey, it's open again, we're going to do this thing. So I don't think actually anything changed. And I think now, over the last 3 or 4 months of just wild craziness on the tariff front, I think people are going, uh-oh, is this going to happen again? And I think the answer to that is yes. And so, like, when I sit back and I look at our supply chain, I don't, like, to your point on machines, it's hard to get an answer on anything. Like, where's all your tooling made? We've been working with our tooling supplier trying to get the answer to that for 2 months now. So, like, I don't think it's more resilient. I think that's a very long answer to a short question.
Yeah.
Dave?
I think it's very fragile as well. Uncertainty, training, people, capital, so it's very difficult. Fortunately, they still require all the implants, or most of them, to be made in the U.S. If everyone wants to have a U.S.-made implant or European-made implant, so that's protected us for a long time. So it's good, but I don't see that changing. But the challenge is, can we really meet that demand and continue to do it at a high level and at a pricing point that seems reasonable? Earlier, I talked about the cost of healthcare in the U.S. versus the cost of healthcare in the European Union. 16% of GDP here, it's 10% in the EU. They also live longer in the EU, so something's going to give there. And I think there's going to be pricing pressure. The healthcare market is not really a market in many ways. The consumer really doesn't pay for it. And all the government involvement, if you look at what happens with cosmetic surgery or eye correction, that's really a market. But a lot of the orthopedic market is not really a traditional market. It's an environment. It's a peculiar economic environment. And as a result, it can be changed to meet certain needs. the government mandates, well, the government already mandates pricing on stuff, really got worse. You know, look at the drug guys are starting to get some pressure now. You know, what happens if, you know, we know what we sell, an OEM gets a screw for X dollars, and you know what it goes to the consumer at. It gets billed to Medicare or Medicaid. The consumer doesn't care because they feel like they're not really paying for it. A friend of mine who ran McKinsey's U.S. healthcare practice said that one of the great paradoxes in American healthcare, and that really impacts our discussion here, is that a lot of Americans don't really pay enough attention to their own health, and then when they get a problem occurs, they want the best possible care and they want it for free. So it's really kind of a crazy scenario there, and the market is not really a market. So be careful what we're in here. I mean, we make great products, world-leading technology, but it's you know, it's a fragile environment, I think.
Jeff, anything to add on the resiliency piece?
Only that I think the people in this room have become more resilient as having lived through the two crazy things that I know that I am. I mean, you deal with 100-year plague and then all this stuff and things that you never thought you'd be having to worry about whether that boat's coming or it takes, instead of 8 weeks from China, it takes, I don't know, infinity. So yeah, I think we've all dealt, and we ourselves are a bit more resilient as a consequence.
And that's really a cause for hope, I think.
Yeah.
Because everyone who's in this business has been through and survived, has been through a lot. And, you know, just about how much can you take, or how much should you take, or who wants to stay in it?
I used to have hair.
Yeah. No, it's a challenge. I mean, people issues, you know, the whole thing is just really difficult. When I first got into this thing, and look at the regulatory environment we're in now, it's much more different than 15 or 20 years ago for a contract manufacturer. I think 20 years ago, you weren't even supposed to be registered with the FDA if you were a contract manufacturer. All that stuff was handled at the OEM level. Now, you know, not so, you know, much more has been pushed down to the contract manufacturer. Yeah, then again, I go back to cost of goods and versus sales commissions and all that. So.
Nate, what are one or two of the biggest trends driving the areas where you play specifically?
Well, one thing that I found fascinating, having run large R&D teams for Zimmer and ConMed and Stryker over the years, is that the OEMs seem to be outsourcing a significant amount of their new products. So just like who you have to partner with now, it's like traditionally if we wanted to do something with, you know, my last company, ConMed, we would work with the R&D team, and we would develop a product. What it seems to be happening right now is that these companies have these massive R&D teams, and they're strictly focused on sustaining engineering, remediation for FDA. They're not really innovating anymore. So it's had the effect on us is we have to like broaden our aperture of who our customer is. And so we're having to partner with design firms. We're having to partner with startups who are then selling those things to like the J&Js or the Zimmers. And it's been pretty wild, because it's like you have 250 design engineers. Why aren't they designing something, right? So that's been a pretty remarkable development that I think has really just accelerated over the last few years. And like, you know, one of the things that Tiber Medical did really well was they did that and the contract manufacturing. So it's been, as we constantly re-examine our business model, that's something that we're, you know, keeping front of mind is this going to be a long-term trend from the OEMs?
Dave, how about you? What trends have you identified?
Well, since we got involved with ATEC Spine, it's in 2018 or something in a big way. We're a supplier to them initially, and then, you know, we're now the largest shareholder. But the consolidation of the spine market has been a very interesting trend for that perspective. And the spine is just a tough business. And, you know, you had two OEMs, large, that left the business completely. Great opportunity for Jeff. And, but it's really tough. And you get the highest, and one of the things I really like about the folks at ATEC is they're not just focused on building parts, but they're really focused on improving outcomes. And, you know, the joke in the spine industry used to be, you know, what was the first thing you said when you woke up from your fusion, you know, to ask your doctor? It's like, when are you going to go back in and fix it? Fortunately, that trend is getting better. The revision rate's coming down. And, but it's very difficult. So I found out, I think what I'm seeing there is for spine in particular, unless you're solely focused on spine, it's just a really tough business to be in. And you can't be, a Stryker or a Zimmer or whatever, and make everything from beds to all the other stuff, and also be spine. So it's good. Actually, I think it's very helpful for patients to see that. And then the other thing I talked about earlier was, the trend is labor challenges in terms of cost of labor and availability of trained and skilled people. And it's just interesting at Structure Medical, our large contract manufacturer, we spend more on healthcare than we do on steel and titanium. So are we a healthcare company or a contract? Are we a healthcare company that also makes devices? Or, it's really kind of a strange thing, but it's very difficult. And that trend, we need, it's going to be tough that's why we have to focus on productivity and, the availability and cost of labor. It's really big challenges. So.
Jeff, what trends are you seeing at High Ridge?
I can't underscore the negative impact of the EU MDR on a company our size.
Oh, yeah.
And 20 years ago, I was more involved on the develop R&D side as in the quality department, and we would go to Europe first with a Class 2 device so that you could then leverage the case information and the case data to then come here and put it in front of the FDA. And the world has completely changed in that regard. And it's really a difficult regulatory environment in Europe, and I can't. And it has continued to sort of, COVID caused, kind of kicks down the road, and we really mean it this year, and then okay, we'll delay it again, and we really mean it. But it is coming, and it's very difficult, and it's exceptionally expensive to react to that. And I think everybody in the room probably can relate to that. But I would say that that's something that is it's a trend. It's causing a lot of cost in the ecosystem, and that's one thing that's going to have to, someone's gonna have to give there. I think you'll see, you've already seen some companies elect to not remain there.
Yeah.
I think that will continue to grow, and then I think it won't cause another necessarily Brexit, but countries that are not in the EU, like Switzerland, they're like, no, we're not gonna do that, thank you. So I think that's one that I feel specific pain with today in my world.
Yeah, it's a big one.
So, Jeff, you mentioned the EU. Are there market adjacencies or specific regions of the world that you're watching closely as opportunities?
We watch the EU very closely as it relates to that dynamic. When we look at our business and international expansion, our best market outside of the United States is Japan. Japan, for us, continues to be a very steady grow company, and having the, believe it or not, the carve out in the prior company's name is quite helpful for us in the Japan market. So we're continuing to look at that as a market of opportunity, and a lot of people here will know that everybody's trying to go into South America, particularly Brazil, as sort of one of the next largest developing markets. They have their own complexities with their stuff in terms of their regulatory environment that aren't easy, but that's probably, if I were to call it today, I'd say that our OUS focus is firstly Japan, and then secondly Brazil, and more developed when everybody loves Australia. They have a pretty good market there, but those would be the two that I'd say that everybody's probably dying to get into and grow their business there.
Nate, how about you?
Yeah, I got a little bit different take being a supplier. So we're just kind of in a bit of a holding pattern right now, trying to see what happens with all this tariffs. But from a supplier standpoint, what has been interesting about the EU MDR that Jeff mentioned is that it has changed. Like if you do get MPI or you do get some kind of transfer, getting it relicensed in the EU is, to your point, it's almost like registering in Japan nowadays. So it's 2 years from your launch in the US, whereas 20 years ago you'd launch in the EU and then bring it to the US. And so we're keeping an eye on that. And then just like I said, from a supply standpoint, what percentage of our product is actually made in some form or fashion in China?
Yeah.
And I would, and it's valueless. It's valueless complexity and cost, because it's not improving anybody's outcome.
No.
It's the same device we've been selling for years there, and now you got to go and redo all this stuff and spend $20 million, and there is no change to the outcome for the patient. That's one of the things that's pretty frustrating about it.
Dave, how about you?
So in terms of markets, I tell you, we're very interested in extremities, especially foot and ankle, and spine, as I mentioned before. I think those are great opportunities in many, many places. We're looking at Australia, New Zealand as great markets. Brazil has been mentioned, and of course Japan. I mean, the issues are, with the regulatory environment, the economic environment, and the pricing that's that's happening in the area, and what's the medical structure. A lot of these companies have very socialized medical programs, and are you going to be able to, from an OEM perspective, is if you sell at half the U.S. price, is this going to work for you? And is expanding going to cost a lot of money in terms of a restrictive capital environment? How are you going to do that? And of course, the EU MDR thing is a huge pain in the butt, and you got to work through it. And it's really, you think that this would be easier, but it's really not. And Japan's tough too. So I applaud Jeff's company for having good access to Japan, because we've struggled to get in there in our so
It's a hard market.
So, Nate, obviously we heard a lot today about the pressure, the disruption, uncertainty. As you look out 5 years from now, what do you see for the orthopedic market?
I think this last 5 years has been chaos. And I think I'm fortunate when I got out of the military, 25 years ago now, I'm fortunate that I landed in med devices by accident. I would interview with everybody, and I ended up in med devices by accident. I think it's the best industry in the world to be in. And I think, this 5 years of chaos, I think we've survived. We've gotten better. We've gotten more efficient. I think the next 5 years are going to be, I think this is the best industry to be in. I can't tell you what it's going to be like in 25 years with all the dynamics that Dave has already alluded to, but over the next 5 years, I think we're going to get back to good mid-single digit growth. We're going to see some emerging technologies in spine. We're going to see some emerging technologies in extremities. And whether that's foot and ankle or the shoulder, I think it's just a fantastic time to still be in the industry.
How about you, Jeff?
I'm curious, as being in the spine market, you see sort of the divestiture of the specialty orthopedics out of the large OEMs. I'm curious as to what other conglomerates like a Stryker or what other businesses that they acquired that were innovative that they weren't able to sort of figure it out, and they're going to have to put those back out on their own. I think that possibly could happen more on the side of the audience in the room. We see continued consolidation there, and a lot of PE-backed firms, which probably wasn't the case 10 years ago. A lot of folks in the room, you walk up to their building, and the guy who made that guy or girl who founded the company, their name's on the building outside, and I see less of that every day than I have in the past. So that will probably, I guess, continue to occur in the OEM side, or excuse me, the contract manufacturing side.
Dave?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the great things will be watching the automation hit improvements in manufacturing. So I think any type of automation, given the labor challenge we have here and the cost of that, it'd be very exciting to see that. And I think it's just going to be necessary to watch that and push for some of that stuff even to happen faster than it's happening now. I talked about programming. Why are we still doing the way we are? Why can't we have AI do it for us real quickly? And not just a basic program, but a very complex one. So seeing that happen, I think, is going to be really critical. I'll also talk about information-centric procedures. And why did it was a couple of years ago when we were at Orthopediatrics, and I was talking to the guy who was the chief medical officer, and he was an old school surgeon, very experienced pediatric orthopedic surgeon. And I said, well, look at this. You can do a 3D, you can take an image, an x-ray image, and create a 3D model, and you could rehearse the procedure ahead of time, especially on a spine procedure, and have some information that may be helpful in getting through this thing quickly. He said, no one will ever use that. And but that was his generation. That's the way they did. They kind of went in there. They had an X-ray, stuck it up on the thing, and and okay, here we go. But that's changing now, and I think that's really good. I saw it at OMTEC Spine. They acquired EOS imaging, low-dose imaging, to do a preoperative, very detailed low-dose imaging. It gives three-dimensional perspective. Then intraoperative monitoring and observation of the patient, and then again using EOS post-op. And I'm kind of using that as an example, but other companies are doing it as well. So it's more information-centric. Orthopediatrics has an like a checklist now that's going in the OR instead of the papers they stick up on the wall now with tape. They have it's a very nice system there that, it's like an aircraft, like a flight checklist for a space mission where everything, who's doing what, when, make sure everything's prepped, laying that stuff out. So I think information-centric procedures and then monitoring, understanding, and then collecting the data and say, hey, this was very successful, and monitoring that year after year, and what device worked best, and going back and tracking that will be very, very, that's exciting to see as well. And of course, I don't want to belabor it, but extremities, spine, and certain pediatric specialties are of special interest to me, because I just think that's where there's going to be a lot of opportunity to do that and get better at what we're doing, especially in the spine. My God, it's still, it's not the outcomes aren't as high as other procedures like knees or hips or anything like that. It's getting a lot better though, and so that's very encouraging.
So one of the common themes I heard during the discussion today was, that this, where we need to find more skilled labor for the CMs. I'm going to open this to whoever would like to take a swing at it. You could wave a magic wand. What is your fix for that?
I'll take the first swing at that. So first, it's a cultural swing. For many years, if you didn't go to college, in many places, you were seen as, second-class citizen. And you went to college, and you then took on a lot of debt, and ended up in some career and ended up doing something that was not related to anything you learned at college. And I'm not belittling that kind of education, but we need to really get back to a high level of skilled trades education. And I see this happen. The foreign workers we get, that recent immigrants to our country come in there, some of them are very, very skilled, and their country valued those people at the same level they valued others. So there's a cultural shift we need to do. We need to put the same amount of, I said we spent 6% of GDP on education. I'd have to break down further, what percentage do we spend on trades education, okay? I bet it's fractional, right? So we need to do better on that. And the facilities that we do, this is all tied to that education environment. Some of the VOTEC training facilities are not great. They're not using current equipment or whatever, and that's very, very sad. I always look at organizations, are they trained, manned, equipped, organized, led, and resourced for success? And so working on labor. And the other thing is focusing on, when I got out of the military and got into business, I was kind of shocked at how little, there was a lot of talk about management, but not so much talk about leadership. And we ultimately manage resources, but we lead organizations. So I think that's a big thing to focus on too. And these guys were probably all saw that as well coming out of there. But I was really stunned at how little effort there was on leadership training. Oh, management this, management that. And I go, some people thought it was the same thing. So I think it's really critical we do that. Train people not only to be skilled technicians and run these machines, but also train them to lead these organizations. And I always said that our organizations are only limited by the ability of the leadership, and it's very critical to do that.
Jeff or Nate, anything to add?
I can't fix the cultural piece. That's a challenge. I think if you are in an area closer to a technical school, partnering with them, we've got a good relationship with one near our Alabama facility. We've got one up in near one of our facilities in Michigan. Partnering with them, supplying them, helping fund graduates or students rather. I think the more you can do of that, the better. And you have it's almost like you would think as an intern, bringing in interns in a traditional company. You're doing the same thing, and there's a job waiting for you at the end of it. And so I think we've done well in a couple of our facilities. We haven't done well in some others.
Yeah, the only thing I would not count on a federal response to the problem. I would say that it's going to happen in industry, and it's going to happen at the local level to do exactly what you're saying. I do think that the pendulum is a little bit. So I have lots of nephews, and I don't tell any. Don't go be a plumber and work in Aspen. You'll be doing great. So go be a skilled tradesman. And I think the attitude of it is, it's not there yet, but it is beginning to shift.
Better.
Not everybody feels like they've got to go study underwater basket weaving and spend $300,000 to do it. They can go to a trade school and they can make a good living.
Ironically,
I do think that's swinging back.
The student debt crisis may be helping that.
It probably will. Yeah.
Maybe the force, unfortunately, it forces people to say, look in a different way. as opposed to taking on a ton of debt and then having a degree that's really not helpful in that. So
I'm not using my political science degree very often.
Yeah.
I can tell you that.
All right, gentlemen, one more question, then we'll get you out of here. So you all have a ton of experience. Jeff, we'll start with you. If you could go back with all your lessons learned now and tell your younger self or someone coming into the industry, what lessons learned would you impart to them?
I'd probably go into sales so I can get that 35% sales comp that I'd say, if as you grow up in your career, there's probably some younger people do lots of different things horizontally across your career, whether you're, I'm sure Nate has a very similar, he flew helicopters and did a bunch of other things. I shot artillery, and in my medical device, I've been in quality and regulatory and on the engineering side and in the business side and done a variety of roles. Don't ever turn down a role to go do something, even if it's in a place that might be uncomfortable, overseas or whatever, and just continue to, the broader the base, of experiences you have left, right, and adjacent, the more doors that present themselves to you, and that would be my advice to my younger self.
Nate, how about you?
That's great advice. I kind of stumbled throughout my career, and I think I did a lot of what you just said. It's I went, started in ops, and then I went into marketing, and then I went into sales, then I went back into marketing, and then, I took an opportunity to move to Canada, but nobody else wanted to do, and took that opportunity. And I think it's just, I couldn't have predicted where my career would have, led me 25 years ago, but I think just echoing what Jeff said is just be open to doing things that nobody else wants to do, because those are the jobs where you can make a big difference and a big impact. And I would say, like, there's a lot of the jobs I've taken over have been dumpster fires. And I don't know if I was the first person they asked. I know I was the first person that said yes. And so, go find a problem and fix it. It's something I learned a long time ago, and it's been useful throughout my career.
Dave?
I would agree. I would say the dumpster fires are opportunities.
Yes.
And for a young person starting out, I try to find, start out at the very fundamental level of the business, and then I would try to matriculate up to every difficult position, accept any challenges, establish a reputation as a problem solver, and always personally look at stuff and say, when I leave, I know in the military, every time I left an organization, I like to feel that I contributed to making that organization better than when I got there, whether it was creating the team, leading, whatever, to make it a better place than when I arrived. So take any job, be willing to move and experience different things. If your company says, hey, we need you to go to Europe for a couple of years, you need to do that. I think it's very good. Get a global perspective, whether we like it or not. We're interconnected throughout the world right now, and we need leaders who can experience that and understand that global dynamic in whatever business you're in. It's it's a complex place, and also be willing to step up and take leadership positions where no one, that's a hard thing to do. Some people want to leave at, get in there at 9 o'clock in the morning, leave at 5. If that's your deal, you're going to be a great manager. But we need leaders to run organizations. That's people who make things happen. The managers are essential. We love them. We need them, but they're never going to be the leaders of the place. So,
great answers. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your participation today, your insight. Thank you all for joining us. We'll get you out to the show floor a couple minutes early today. Thank you, and see you out there.
Okay.